All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. We're in Tools and Testing, talking cross-browser testing. The next section here, as you can see, is handling common HTML and CSS problems. It says, with the scene set, we'll now look specifically at common cross-browser problems you will come across in HTML and CSS code. As you'd probably guess, in the next lecture or video, we'll talk about common problems you come across with JavaScript code. This article will also discuss the tools that can be used to try to prevent these problems from happening or fix them when they occur. This includes linting, handling CSS prefixes, using browser dev tools, using polyfills, responsive design problems, and there's other things that can happen as well. So, some of the trouble with HTML and CSS lies in the fact that both languages are fairly simple. You may or may not have your own opinions on that. And oftentimes, developers don't take them seriously. I don't know if that's the case, as much as sometimes I don't think developers understand HTML and CSS and all of the intricacies as much as they could understand them. In the worst cases, JavaScript is used to generate the entire web page content and style, which makes your pages inaccessible and less performant. And again, especially for people using assistive technology. We've talked about that in the past. All right. In other cases, features are not supported consistently across browsers, which can make features and styles not work for some users. Responsive design problems are also a problem. A site that looks good on a desktop might look terrible on a mobile device, etc. All right. As mentioned here in the first article in the series, it says it's a good idea to begin with is to test in a couple of modern browsers on desktop and mobile to make sure the site is working generally. So you want to at least do that to start with to see, hey, am I in the right ballpark type of an idea? In the earlier debugging articles, it says we provided some basic guidance on debugging HTML and CSS. We've already looked at those. If you need to, go back and take a look at it. One common problem, it says there, with CSS and HTML arises when different CSS rules begin to conflict with one another. Remember that sometimes it's last in first, all right? But what I mean is, if I've got an ID and I do some stuff and later I do some other stuff with the same ID, the last one listed is going to be the one that that is going to take precedence. IDs take precedence over classes, which take precedence over the actual controls, which take precedence over the browser default styles, etc. However, as it says, this can be especially problematic when you use third-party code. It says you might use a CSS framework, and you might find that one of the class names that it uses clashes with something you've defined for something different. To ensure this doesn't happen, you need to research the tools you are using first and design your code around the tools. It's also worth noting that namespacing CSS can help as well. All right. Validation, and I just mentioned that I think in the last video. For HTML, validation involves making sure your tags work properly, they're properly closed and nested. You've got a doc type in there, you've got the lang attribute for your HTML, etc. The W3 markup service is the one that I use. And again, the W3C has the CSS validator as well, and that's the Jigsaw one. We've looked at that. All right. Linters. Another good option is the so-called linter application, which not only points out errors, but can be used to flag warnings and bad practices. Linters can generally be used to customize, to be stricter or more relaxed in the way they report errors. There are many available. The author says they think the best are dirty markup, which can be used for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and CSS lint for CSS only. There's also JS lint, etc. And there's other things that you can use as well. All right. It says it's not very convenient to go and paste your code into these, and you've seen me do this. Many code editors have built-in linters. Atom does. In fact, if I go in what we've been using here, and I go over here on the side and I look at extensions, and I type in lint, there's SAS lint, SCSS lint, coffee lint. You can see literally how many of these different linters there are as you start working your way through here. The browser development tools built into most browsers also feature tools for hunting down errors, mainly for CSS. Now they use Firefox as an example in here, but remember, we can go in here and go into inspect. Some of the stuff that's in here we have not even talked about. So for instance, if I drag this out to make it bigger, you'll notice there's styles in here. There's computed in here. And that computed, for example, will show you as you take a look in here how much, let me close this. All right, it'll go through and it'll show you for different things that you're working on. Should be able to drag this up. Let's see. Just how much space you're using to do different things, for example. There's stuff in here that you can use in the DevTools. Notice it says you're displaying block. It tells you what your font size is. Typically, you can go into a lot of these options where they've got a font size set and you can reset it. All right. Now, it may be overridden by something else that you've already got put in there, but you can make changes to it right inside of the developer tools is what they're getting to. All right, common cross-browser problems. It says, where are we for time here? We're okay. Now let's move on to look at some of the most common cross-browser HTML and CSS problems. The main areas we'll look at are lack of support for modern features and layout issues. And I want to give you a little chronology here. All right, when you are working with Android and you're working with the Android IDE, what you have to do is you have to basically pick a version of what basically is their software development kit, but you want to say, hey, what do I want to support? All right, and why am I even telling you this? Well, let me show you something real quick, and hopefully this is going to make it easier to understand and not harder. But if I go into Android Studio, this is what I have my students do in the AWD 1112 class. So if they come in here, and I'm going to close the project that I've currently got open, and I'm going to say that I want to open a new project. All right, and it's going to ask me where do I want it, what do I want it to be called, etc. And I'm going to just put in here junk. All right, it says that path cannot be found, so it probably is going to make me come in here and create a junk. So let's create a new folder. I'm just going to call it junk. I don't have a folder currently called junk. All right, now I can come in here and do that. Now it's created some stuff for me. I'm not sure why I did it like this because this didn't work at all the way I wanted it to. Let me try that again. All right, so I want to create a new project. There we go. And it says in here, what kind of project do you want to create? Well, typically you choose empty. So I'm going to create an empty project. Now, this is where it gets interesting. It says, what do I want to call it and where do I want to put it? Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I will just put JPS junk. I'm going to get rid of this in just a minute anyway. But it asks the minimum SDK here. And you'll notice I can go all the way back to version 16 and all the way up to the current, which is version 30. The advantage of going down to 16 right there is it now supports 99.8% of devices. But there may be some features that are recent features that are not supported back in these machines right here. So if I go in the other direction and I go up to 30, now it'll run on less than 1% of devices, but you can be sure that it'll handle the latest and the greatest features and functionality. So a lot of the times you'll just come here, you'll kind of cut it in the middle, so to speak, and you'll maybe take about, I don't know, 26. And notice then it runs on 60%. Maybe I want more than that. So I go back down to 4.3. And now it's 98% of devices. Maybe I can even go to 4.4. 98% of devices. All right, hopefully you understand what I'm getting to here, because you'll end up running into the same kinds of problems with what we're talking about. Older browsers typically do not support modern features. You have newer versions because they add new features. All right. So some problems, as it says, can be solved by just taking advantage of the natural way that CSS works. For instance, a lot of times with a lot of the new HTML5 type of widgets or controls, things like the TEL, for example. If the browser you're using doesn't understand it, it just reverts back to text. All right. All right. More complex elements like HTML, video, audio, and canvas have natural mechanisms that allow you to fall back like this. So as mentioned, the example there includes a simple link that allows you to download what you need. And sometimes you just want to tell the user, hey, you've got an older browser, you might want to upgrade to a newer version. Now, whether or not they do that is not up to you, of course, but at least you've given them that, you've let them know. All right. CSS is arguably better at fallbacks than HTML. If a browser encounters a declaration or rule it doesn't understand, it just skips it without throwing any kind of error. This might be frustrating for you and your users, but at least it means the site doesn't come crashing down. It says, let's look at an example. Here, a simple box styled with CSS and some styling properties. So it looks like this. All right. It says the button has a number of declarations, but the two we're most interested in are the button, hover, and the active. So there, when you hover, and active. So let's see. It says you can see this example running live. Notice the look that it gets when you highlight it. All right. It says here we provided an RGBA, which is red, green, blue, alpha background color that changes opacity on hover to give the user a hint that the button is interactive, and some semi-transparent inset box shadow. All right. It says the trouble is that these don't work in IE versions older than 9. In older versions, the background just wouldn't show up at all, so the text would be unreadable, so it would look like this. To sort it out, it says we've added a second background color declaration, which specifies a hex color that is supported for back in really older browsers. All right. Of course, it says no CSS features will apply at all if you don't use the right selectors. And let's face it, there is code out there that people have written either haphazardly, or they didn't know what they were doing, or they were learning as they were doing, or whatever. All right. If you just write a selector incorrectly, so the styling isn't expected in any browser, you'll just need to troubleshoot. I mean, it'll be up to you to fix what the problem is. And they do have an example of it in here. I'm not going to run through the example now. It says if you run this on an older version of IE, it would work fine. Okay. CSS prefixes. I've mentioned these in the past. These are prefixes. That's Moz. That is WebKit. All right. And typically you might see a -MS for Microsoft. WebKit handles, I believe it's Chrome and Safari. Moz, I believe, handles Firefox. The idea is over time, all browsers will begin to support all these features the same way. So this stuff will all be gone. For that reason, it's very important that you also include one that has no browser prefixes in it whatsoever. All right. So they mention here the last 3 lines show the 3 different versions of the linear gradient. The first one, slightly older versions of Firefox. The second one, WebKit. The third one has no prefix. As it says, it shows the final version of the syntax, and it should be the one that's listed last as well. All right. Layout issues, as it says, another problem that might come up in differences in layouts between browsers. Historically, this used to be much more of a problem, but recently, with most modern browsers tending to support CSS more consistently, this is less of an issue. All right, it says, today layout issues tend to be more commonly associated with a lack of support in modern layout features or layouts not looking good in mobile browsers. And again, we've talked about the fact that if when you are creating a site, you use mobile first, so you plan first for a smaller screen size, smaller viewport, and then you scale up, you're going to be better off. All right, floats are the way things used to be done. They pretty much are being superseded by Flexbox and/or CSS Grid. CSS grids are new, it says, and it's supported in the newest versions of modern browsers. Flexbox is supported in modern browsers, but again, can be problematic in older browsers. Responsive design, we've talked about already in some of the problems with that. And again, if you do a mobile first, you're going to run into less problems. And finally, it ends with there are many other issues you'll encounter. Among the best sources for support information is Stack Overflow. Can I use? I've already shown you. Stack Overflow, basically it's a thing for developers. So if I had a question in Stack Overflow, in fact, let's just put this in here. I'm going to go and I'm going to open up a new window right here, and I'm just going to put in here as an example. Let's say cannot remove bullets from list items. I mean, just as an example. All right. And one of the things you're going to find in here, here's one at the top, is Stack Overflow. And it tells you what the problem is. And typically there'll be one or more solutions, but one will be checked, which says, hey, this is the most accepted solution for this. Now, be leery with this. You can have your own account for this. Okay, you can do this. You can ask questions. All right. But if your question is something that, because I've done this, where I put questions out there that I thought were a good question, and people have shot back, well, that's really a stupid question, or that's not a proper question for this, environment, etc. So be leery of that. All right. So it says now we should be familiar with the main types for CSS and HTML. So now we'll jump into common problems that you'll find with JavaScript, and I'll hit on that one in just a minute.